Vulnerability is ultimately it's me pulling back the curtain, allowing you to see, my heart in such a way that I give you something about me that you can potentially turn around and, if you have ill intention, you can harm me with
Sure.
it,
Yeah.
right? You can betray a trust. You can throw it back in my face later on, or you can look at it and, be ashamed of what you now discover
Mm-hmm.
about what you see when you finally get to peek behind the curtain. So vulnerability is that willingness to be brave enough to share what's true in your heart. And to me, this is where what you said a few minutes ago, like you have to be careful with who you're willing to be vulnerable with. But I will say this, you have to have someone that you are expressing vulnerability with.
Now, your journey, I have to say before we get started and kind of in the depths of this conversation, you are one of the most vulnerable men I know. Um, but I know you haven't always been like that. So your journey to
Mm.
vulnerability is unique and different. So I would love for you to share with the people
Yeah,
what that looked like.
I think I can't say that as a blanket statement for all men. I do know the men that I hang with. It is a more difficult practice for the guys that either I grew up with or the ones that I'm closest and most connected to. Our sentiment about it, whether it be trying to communicate with a spouse or with one another, I think that we do great with talking about almost anything else but feelings, or talking about what's really going on in your mind or in your heart. And I think it's because the way that most of us are conditioned, even just through discipline, when you're a kid, is kind of like, I don't know if every household has dealt with this, but in some, it's like you get a whooping, and right after you get a whooping, it's like, shut up,
Yeah,
you
suck it
know,
up.
yeah,
Yeah.
stop crying, So the the irony is like something was done to you that made you cry, and then you're told don't cry. Um,
so,
it's
so much turmoil in that kid's head. It's
yeah,
like,
you know
what
what
do you
I
want me to be?
mean. So there's this you learn then that being okay means quickly getting rid of any form of expression regarding how you may be feeling, especially if that feeling gives off the appearance of being weak.
Or quickly switching to appease someone else's response or desire.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're conditioned to fit in.
Yeah.
And fitting in means that you have to suppress the reality of what's in your heart or the genuine thoughts or feelings or emotions that you may be having, which after a while, it kind of teaches you to tune out your reality, which means you live in denial. And that's the danger of a lack of vulnerability. Because after a while, you live walled in and no one knows the real you. No one knows um, the broken heart that may be behind the jokes that you tell every day. So you come in and yeah, it's a part of you that likes lighting up the room, but the question is why? Beneath it, it's a craving for attention, and so that's why a person could be funny, financially successful, and still contemplating, suicide or checking out on their marriage or still feeling unfulfilled no matter how much they've done. And some of that it can be due to, chemical imbalances,
Yeah.
but then a lot of times it's a matter of shame like pecking away at a man or a woman's soul day by day. They cannot show up, or they think that they cannot show up and be their authentic selves and still be loved.
Mm-hmm.
So when there's not a safe environment, you live every day. I mean, you could be in the same bed with a person and a million miles apart because they really don't know the real you. Um, and so that's not a healthy place, obviously, to live
Right.
in. Um, you want to be in a spot where you know that you genuinely have a safe space to be able to talk about who you are and what's going on in your mind. And sometimes this is the worst part of it. You're you're trying to outthink the vulnerability in your head and it never comes out your mouth because you don't want to say the wrong thing, or you're trying to shape it in a way that that makes the other person accept it or embrace it more. So essentially, by the time you get done expressing whatever it is, it's a watered down version of what really needs to be said.
So it's like you said a couple things. So you're walled off. You're in a cage. You're trying to outthink yourself.
Hmm.
So it's like people are trying to have this growth spurt, like just wanting to be better, wanting to do better, wanting to reach a level of success,
Hmm.
but they're wanting to do it without vulnerability.
Yes. And
What do you think are the consequences of that?
I think a person could amass success because willpower is an amazing thing. Like your willpower can get you really far, but it will, no matter how much success you have or the outward appearance that people may celebrate and applaud, when you lay down at night, can you sleep? When you look in the mirror, do you like what you see? So it's a lot of people who all, dolled up in makeup, covering up a lot of scars beneath the surface. You know what I'm saying? And I ain't got nothing against makeup and stuff. But what I'm saying is sometimes that outer, you know, striving is a lot less like, oh, this is how I want to look, and I walk outside and this is just who I am. Deal with it. Sometimes it's like really inside the person is picking themselves apart so bad that they literally are covering it up, or they dress exactly like some other person that they think is beauty, when honestly your story, even if it's ugly, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Your real thoughts should be embraced. So that kind of takes us to another book that we read that I think is phenomenal on this, and you can dive in a lot on it. But Soul of Shame. Soul of Shame is a really good book, and it's by an author named Kurt Thompson. And Kurt Thompson talks about the fact that shame is when he gives a comparison of guilt and shame, and Brene Brown does the same thing. But guilt says I did something bad. Shame says I am someone bad, and that's a subtle difference, but it's huge. Guilt may be used to help you grow because you at least are convicted that, man, I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should go apologize. So it can lead to change or transformation. But shame, I am something bad, it means that you don't think that you are complete, that your story is enough significantly to be heard by other people, that you won't be embraced because you're too broken, that you're too imperfect a person, and so you're so bad that you don't deserve love, you don't deserve connection.
Well, shame also causes you to hide,
Hmm.
and we're not created to hide.
Right.
We're created to connect.
Yeah.
We're created to expose ourselves before people who we can trust.
Hmm.
And so when we operate in shame, it kind of goes back into that prison. We put ourselves in a corner, and nobody puts baby in a corner.
Right.
But we put ourselves in a corner to where we're walled off and we're living isolated, yet we are only connected because we're forced to work with people,
Right.
and we're forced. I mean, you can't go day to day without connecting with somebody.
Well, I think to that point, I think people think they are connecting because they're in proximity, or because they're engaging on social media, or they have kids. So they see they're in the vicinity of humans. It doesn't mean that they're genuinely connecting. So to me, connecting, to your point, is being seen, known, and heard. When other people can see you for who you are, know you and your story, and then value who you are and what you have to say without making you feel ashamed
Yeah.
for being who you are, that's real connection.
Yeah.
So if you were to consider your life right now and you're thinking with your ebb and flow of life, daily grind, do you have a time during a week where somebody actually knows you, like you're vulnerable enough to say, this is how I was feeling on Monday,
Yeah.
and lately life has been kicking me, and I feel like God has abandoned me, or I feel like this situation is unfair, and maybe it's my fault, but maybe it's their fault. Yeah. And you can't sit down and just like talk that
Share.
out, and the person on the other end of it doesn't like give you the space to be able to walk through that without hijacking the moment, or without condemning you or pointing the finger and further reinforcing a negative narrative about yourself, I think that you're not really experiencing connection, which means that you're not really experiencing freedom.
I think both of us have had our moments of vulnerability with one another, going through life advances and transitions, and one season to the next. I remember, you were going through a situation and you needed to be vulnerable with me, and I'm restorative by default. I'm a fixer. So you got a problem, you bring it to me because I'm gonna help you fix it. But when you shared, the situation you were going through, the first comment you made before you dove into it was, I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to listen. And that was a big adjustment for me, but that was you saying, I'm about to be vulnerable with you. This isn't about fixing it. This is about you being able to sit down with me
Right.
in community, being seen, heard, and known.
Yeah. And what it means to be like in that space where you got somebody who can, what you provided for me once that was said, it was like, I mean, obviously it took an adjustment because everything in you wants to fix a person's problem. So if you're the friend,
Especially if you care for them.
yeah, if you're the friend on the other end of somebody coming and just trying to be vulnerable to you, you have to know when the right time, when's the right time to fix and when's the right time to just focus and just be there. One of the ways I like to say it is when a person's soul has not been seen, as the Genesis would say in the garden, where a person could be naked and not ashamed, but standing there and they can have their story told and somebody embrace their story and not cast them away. That's the way God created us in the garden. And we still need that same thing to this day. When you can find yourself in a space where that can be done, what it does is gives it gives light to what shame wants you to keep in the dark. It exposes the negative self-talk. It exposes the lies that somebody probably spoke over your life as you were growing up or in high school, or something your ex-spouse said about you that you've been carrying on you. All that negative self-talk and self-doubt, or doubt about God's existence and his presence in your life, all that doubt that you're unlovable, you'll never make it, all of the negative thoughts, they don't go away just because you transitioned. They don't go away just because time passed. That stuff is in you, and after a while,
Gosh, yeah.
it's kind of like you have on glasses. If you take off those glasses, the way you see is different. Not just what you see, the way you see is different. And so when we talk about being bound by shame, it's like you have shame glasses on. You have, how you see on the cartoons, the good angel, the bad angel.
Yeah.
You have an angel of shame on your shoulder. Not really, but you got this little thing on your shoulder that's just constantly reminding you of how you suck, reminding you of how bad life is, reminding you of how no one will ever love you.
And I think that's a great point, because it never goes away, because we're born in sin and shaped in iniquity, and we are flesh. So, like, that voice can be died down for a certain amount of time,
Right.
but then you're put in a predicament to where all of a sudden that voice just pops back up, and it's just kind of like, where
And
did that come
the
from?
only way to get rid of it is not, you can't just go to God about it. You have to also connect with another person about it. So God is the one who is going to say, "Hey, you've been washed, you've been made clean." But another human being is going to be the person who represents like the physical embodiment of God, and they pray for you that you may be healed. And as you confess to them and they look at you with eyes of compassion rather than eyes of condemnation, you get that sense of wholeness, that I'm all right in the world. I don't have to pretend. I don't have to keep this mask up. So, what vulnerability creates is a healing in and of itself, because you get to share your story. So I think that a couple of precautions that I would throw out there. One would be, there's a difference between just being blunt and loud, or just tell all your business to everybody everywhere. Like, to me, that's just unwise, and it's not vulnerability.
It's just noise.
Yeah, it's noise, and in some ways, it's just you being messy.
Yeah.
And you have to also ask yourself, why do you need to do that if you're doing that? Why do you need to just open up to everybody and tell everything? Some people, Jesus would say, like, don't cast your pearls before the swine. I think that there's, precious things need to be held in precious esteem. You have to learn how to guard, your story in a way that not every detail needs to be said every time you're talking about it. I've had some traumatic stuff happen to me in my life. I don't tell everybody all the
Well,
details
that's what I was about to say.
in every setting. You know what I mean?
So, how do you know who to be vulnerable with, right? Do you automatically lead every relationship with vulnerability? Do you just kind of not in that careless, like,
Right.
type attitude that you were just talking about, but do you just share with people, hey, this is where I've been
I
and now this is who I
I
am?
feel like trust is earned, and so if I start off with something small, like I've had people that I've shared a basic story that was in confidence with them, and they take that thing and they share it with somebody else, and it was never meant to be taken outside of that circle. So I'm not going to live for the rest of my life like not telling another secret. But the idea is, either I'm going to redirect and I'm going to go back to that person and say, hey, look, man, I told you that to you in confidence. Why does so and so forth over there knows about it? You know, I need to be able to trust you with this.
Yeah.
Because some of y'all live with the person that betrayed the trust. It could be your spouse. They took something and started talking to their in-laws.
That's another video we'll
It
talk
could be
about.
your kids, your or siblings, where you
Right.
got one that said one something to the other one, and something said something to the other one. The next thing you know, you got this awkwardness. And sometimes you need to be blunt enough to go back to the person you talk to and say, "Look, man, if you do that again, we ain't doing this no more." Yeah. I think the other aspect is when you begin sharing with a person, you do need to set the right atmosphere and the right tone. Not every place is the right space to just open up and start sharing your heart. But if you ask somebody to go for coffee, or you call somebody up on the phone and say, hey, you got 20 minutes, I need to talk to you about something, and you begin to set the right atmosphere,
Yeah.
and talk through it, and they keep hijacking the moment and talking about themselves, or they betray the trust by telling you how dumb you were, and they start condemning and shaming you and putting you down, then that person has taught you a really great lesson. They are not a safe space.
Yeah. And sometimes you think they are a safe place, right? You've had relationships for years, and you've built or you've invested in this relationship, and so now you're taking it to the next level
Yeah.
and giving them access to your heart, and then a couple years or a couple months later they kind of step on it.
Yep.
And I think it's very important to say that in all of our relationships, when it gets to that point, you are going to have to risk it,
Yeah,
right?
that's one of the things Brene Brown talks about. That vulnerability is the risk of uncertainty. And I agree with her. I mean, you don't know what somebody's going to do with it. Thing is, you can't live in a prison for the rest of your life
That's it.
in fear of what somebody's going to do, because
Neither is
truthfully,
it your fault.
yeah, that's true. The thought is that it's safer out than sitting in. So even
Wait,
it's a good thought. It's safer out
safer
than
out
sitting
than
in,
sitting in.
because some of that stuff that some of y'all ain't told nobody is toxic. I mean, one of the thoughts that a trauma therapist said to me that was just amazing. They said the longer that you're holding on to the secret about what happened to you is the longer you protect the predator who violated you. And I was just like, I'd never thought about it like that. So I'm literally sitting in not just the trauma that happened to me, but I'm holding it. And in holding that stuff, it was also holding me captive. And it's no wonder that all through scripture, confession is good for the soul. Confess that you may pray with one another. The idea of confessing is getting it out, because at some point you hold that stuff in, you can't dethrone the baggage that comes with it till you're willing to confront it. You're gonna be as sick as your secrets. So, you know, there's a verse of scripture in Jeremiah, I believe it says, you cannot heal a wound by saying it's not there. And I think that there's a lot of wounded hearts that need safe places to be able to share a lot of stuff that is going on. And the sad part is, I think that we need both to learn to be vulnerable. And then I think that also we need to learn to be people who could slow down enough to learn to be a safe space for other people.
Okay, so let's park it right there. What does that look like? Like, if we could put steps to how do I become a safe place in my marriage, in my friendships, um, even if like you in your in as a coworker, like, or just you just want to be a safe place for people.
Yeah, this is gonna sound really bad, and I'm not trying to trigger anybody, but the truth is, you need to treat it like a funeral. It's a person who is trying to be vulnerable with you most times, especially if they're sharing something that's a secret or something that was traumatic, or they're sharing something that really bothered them. They're grieving. It's grief. It's the person is trying to reconcile some kind of loss. That loss could be, I thought I was in control, but I found out I wasn't. I thought I'd never do that sin again, and then I did it again. What are they grieving? They're grieving being stupid,
Or the
making a
mistake.
mistake. You know what I'm saying? A person made a financial decision that was awful, and they lost their house, and now they want to talk about it. They're grieving the loss of that house, or they got a divorce. They're grieving, that somebody they thought they was going to be with for life is gone. It's a funeral. What would you do at a funeral? You don't grow up and I can't. Let me tell you, one of the people I can't stand at funerals is that
What?
person that gets up and gonna take the mic and say the only time we get together is when we had a funeral. Let's make sure that this ain't gonna happen. This is not the time to preach that sermon. You could have sent a mass text message to the whole family
Let it
prior
be
to
it
that
known.
moment. Be it, all that stuff. But the goal of really what a funeral should be is, or a homegoing, whatever you want to call it, the goal of it would be to say, hey, what would you do if a loved one, you know, is laid out there and they're struggling? What would you do? Well, I'm going to give you the power of my presence.
Yeah. And sometimes I don't have to say anything.
Exactly.
Just be there.
I'm just present, and I'm gonna look at you with compassion. It's like a solemn assembly to a degree where I'm more reserved. I might not be. I might tell a joke eventually.
Yeah.
At the repast. That's cool. We might sing a song. We might do something like, I'll cry with you at the funeral.
Yeah.
And there's been times I've gone to homegoings and stuff like that. I barely even knew the person, but just the grief in the room hits you in a way to where you respond to what their pain is. And if that's the beginning to me is, can I grieve with you even though it wasn't my loved one?
It has absolutely nothing to do with me.
Yes, that's connection. That's real empathy. It's where I feel what you feel, and because sympathy is where I just feel for you, which ain't bad. But empathy is where I grieve with you. I come down to where you are. I feel your pain, and then I move into that pain with you to do something about it. And so I think that the art of being an empathetic listener is being able to take it in,
That's good.
and sit with them, and then sometimes ask clarifying questions. And some of y'all, that you want to be therapists. You know what I mean? So you can kind of learn to probe without trying to troubleshoot their trauma, because sometimes that's not really what's needed. It's just a matter of, I'm gonna be present, but I'll ask clarifying questions to help you think through it a little bit.
One of the things I love about Kurt Thompson, he has a podcast called Being Known.
Love that podcast.
And it is one of the best podcasts I've ever
It
listened
was
to,
one of my
especially
favorites.
season 2. I think.
Season 2 was a jam.
Anyway, within that season, he talked about the power of community and how a person who is going through a particular situation in the height of their trauma or as they're processing whatever their grief is, being able to look someone in the eye who has eyes of compassion or who has empathetic eyes, and being able to look eyeball to eyeball, and healing actually begins to take place on a neurological level.
Yeah.
So, like, knowing or going back to the question of, do you have a group of people who you can sit down with
Right.
and they can look at you in the eye,
Right.
and you can look at them in the eye, and healing begins to take place.
Yeah, man. It really is that simple. And I know it, but who makes the time to do that? You know, most times when we're in gatherings, and I'm not against activities, y'all. I'm not a Scrooge in that sense, but I'm just saying, like, most times when we think we're having family time, it's really just people looking at screens. You know, if we go to dinner, even most times people are looking at screens. We're not looking at eyeball to eyeball, and I think that that's strategic of the enemy. I'm not against technology, but I also know that if the majority of times we're looking down, this is
Yeah.
us. We're looking at something. We're not present with people. We're somewhere else for a life that ain't even real. It's a waste of time. We scroll to soothe when what we really should be doing is eye to eye connection, communication, activities together, doing life together. And I think that, you know, if we're going to become vulnerable spaces, you got to give your eyes. You got to give people time. And also, you just ask questions and pray for somebody. I do want to talk about prayer for a second, because I think that, like, how you pray, what you pray, how long you pray, all that stuff matters. And I think you can be spirit led. You know, God will give you what to pray in those moments and stuff like that for people. But the goal is that you're not trying to be, and it's gonna sound really weird.
Okay.
You're not trying to be a person's therapist when they're being vulnerable, and you're not trying to be their miracle worker.
Or their preacher.
Don't be there. But so if I'm praying for you, I'll rather pray for you like I'm praying for myself, like I'm in that mode. You know what I'm saying? And then we're gonna connect. And here's the best part. This is the most important. The next time I see you, it's not as if it didn't happen, but I'm also not every time trying to throw it back up in your face.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we can follow through,
Yeah.
and I could just say, "Hey, everything good?"
Yeah.
You know, everything
I
good.
don't have to
All
make
right,
me
cool.
noticeable. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Did things
Yeah,
change?
and we make it real dramatic. It's just kind of, and grief is weird. You know what I mean? So sometimes you don't know how much do I push, because sometimes, you know, people will guilt trip you and they say, "Well, I told you all that stuff, and you didn't follow up with me."
Yeah.
So for anybody who wants to get to a place of vulnerability, but you feel like the family and the friends that you have around you are too toxic to handle that level of being a safe place, then I would say you have to find like a therapist that you can confide in, to where they just become your safe space to let it out.
Yeah.
The other thought that I have is that sometimes you have to try multiple times with a safe person just to brave up enough courage to learn being vulnerable. So sometimes you might need to set yourself up on a schedule with a mentor or with your spouse or with your kids, and you have a certain set of questions that help y'all to both talk about how you're doing, how you feeling, what do you see, what are you going through that you're struggling with? What is shame saying to you right now? Like, these are questions. These are pretty good questions that you can just kind of answer and then unpack when y'all have y'all's conversation. It's just like 4 or 5 questions that are just accountability questions that y'all can meet once a week. You just set it up on a consistent basis. And that way you don't go these long stretches where you ain't talked to nobody and you haven't let this stuff out. You know, that way you're putting yourself in a routine of being, you know, a highly vulnerable person. And if you can miraculously find a small group that's a connected group of people that you do life with that are willing to be worthy of trust, you know what I'm saying? To be able to do that, Lord knows that's a game changer. You know, I can honestly say that I've had men that were that for me, and they helped me to become, I think, more vulnerable in my walk as well. So for those of y'all who you want more resources like this, check out SeanandLanette.com. Make sure you click on the links in the description for more resources. If your marriage needs a tune-up, or you want some coaching for your life, we would love to help you out. You can click the link in the description below to set up a time to meet with us. We love giving strategies for life, man. We appreciate y'all hanging with us. Like, subscribe, share.